Shalom Aleichem. Welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Publishing and Public Programs. As always, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual theater, which tonight is actually the Peretz Salon. I'm delighted that you're joining us for tonight's program inside the Peretz Salon, the engine room of modern Yiddish culture with David Mazower. Before we get started, a few quick housekeeping notes. Your video and your audio will be off throughout the program. You may send us questions via the question panel at the lower right-hand side of your screen. We ask that you keep questions short and refrain from comments so we can try to get to all of the questions tonight. I'm delighted to introduce David Mazower, the Yiddish Book Center's bibliographer and chief curator and writer of the Center's new core exhibition, Yiddish, A Global Culture. Welcome, David.
Thank you very, very much, Lisa. And thank you to Elizabeth Carderopoli, who's behind the scenes with us here in the deserted Yiddish Book Center. Thank you both. And yeah, here we are at the threshold of the Peretz Salon. It's one of 17 sections in our new core exhibition. And so really the question is, why recreate the Peretz Salon? Also, how did we do it? We'll come to that, but chiefly why? And I think for me, there are two key reasons. One is the sort of obvious one in that there was really no more influential Yiddish writer in the sort of sweet spot of modern Yiddish culture that the exhibition deals with, which is the late 19th and early 20th century. No more influential Yiddish writer than Yitzhak Leibush Peretz, and his modest apartment in a working class district at the center of Warsaw. And as we'll see, between the time Peretz settled in Warsaw around 1890 and the time of his death, 1915, dozens and almost certainly hundreds of aspiring writers, theater people, actors, folklorists, musicians, anthropologists, ethnographers, it goes on and on, came through this space and were transformed by it themselves, and in the process collectively transformed modern Yiddish culture. So that's, if you like, the obvious reason. And then I think there's, for me anyway, a sort of secondary reason, which is that, you know, if you've been to Moscow or Paris or, you know, most big London, most big cities, there are apartments and houses which are museums to the places the writers lived in. We don't really have that for Yiddish for kind of obvious reasons. There was so much dislocation, the Holocaust, the sort of working class origins of so many writers. They didn't tend to live in established places for a long time. And so we lack that sense of place. And so kind of part of the attraction of creating this immersive space of the Peretz Salon was to reimagine that for Yiddish literature. So what do we have here? We have a quote on the wall, which I don't know if you can see, but it's by Froim Kaganovsky, one of the disciples of Peretz, a short story writer, and it describes the moment that he turned up as a 17-year-old, trembling with anticipation at the threshold of Peretz's apartment. And so we have to have a doorway, because without a doorway, you don't have a shvel, a threshold, and it's the threshold, that moment of transition that was, you know, seared itself into the memories of this generation of young creative figures. And so many of them wrote about it, and, you know, that what were they going to wear? What language were they going to speak? Who was going to greet them at the door? Many of them turned up multiple times and went away because they couldn't summon up the courage to actually ring the bell, and so on. But there are so many memoirs of it. We also have a little sign here. Peretz put a sign on the outside of his doorway that said he receives between 3 and 5 p.m. on a Shabbos, on Saturday. And so this was an invitation, a sort of, you know, within clear parameters, an invitation to aspiring writers to come between those hours and present their work to the great mentor. Before we go inside and see what's inside, I just want to say our thanks to Dr. Martin Peretz, whose generosity really allowed us to create this space. We built a 25 by 12-foot room. Lisa, something like that. She's nodding her head. So, you know, we really built, we built an apartment, we built a living room. And so thanks very much to Dr. Martin Peretz. Okay, we're going to go inside and now imagine yourself back in 1900s Warsaw, and I'll see you inside in just a moment. So you would have seen there an image of turn of the century Warsaw around the 1900s. Actually a street in the Jewish district of Warsaw where Peretz would have walked through on his daily walk. And so we will, we may need to swing it around just a little, Lisa, I don't know, but just so that we can see this portrait here. This is the sort of, this is the opening of the Peretz Salon interior, and the kind of key message of this space is the salon, the circle, the relationship between Peretz and all these young creatives. But we also felt it's important that people have a sense of Peretz as a personality. He was such a towering figure, such a sort of quixotic, fascinating personality that you know, that was very much part of his magnetism and his appeal. And so here we have a colorized photograph of him, colorized by an artist in Turkey called Yusuf Tolga Unker, who did a lovely job. You feel you're face to face with Peretz. And what did it feel like being face to face with him? So Ephraim Kaganovsky, whose quote is on the outside, wrote this about Peretz. Fire blazed from his eyes, fire flowed from his words. Like a sorcerer, he threw bright torches into the dark houses of the narrow, poor streets of Jewish Warsaw. This was the beginning of the renaissance of Jewish secular culture. Peretz, the great, beautiful spirit, had called, awakened, and pledged a dignified, celebratory, creative life. He called for light and education, and those who felt within themselves a spark of spirit, a drop of longing, jumped at his call. Wonderful quote from Kaganovsky, summing up the sort of magnetism of Peretz's clarion call to Jewish youth. So we're in Warsaw around the 1890s and 1900s. Peretz lived in 2 locations in Warsaw. For the bulk of that time, he lived in a really small working class apartment. His room, his living room, their bedroom, and their son Lucian's room. There's really 3 rooms and a small kitchen. Warsaw is a booming Jewish city. Just as New York is a booming Jewish city through emigration, Warsaw is booming through migration, internal migration within the Russian Empire. So people are coming hundreds of miles with the address of this apartment, number 1 Seguana Street, Warsaw, hoping to really make create their futures and refashion themselves as writers and so on. We have a little notebook with doodles, courtesy of the National Library of Israel. It's a wonderful image because it has Peretz playfully playing around with his signature. Is he Leon Isaac Peretz? Is he Isaac Leon Peretz? It has mathematical equations. It has some Hebrew on it. Sort of all the different facets of this protean figure who was very, very immersed in scientific knowledge, in history, in all sorts of progressive ideas that were current at the time. So I'll just quickly give you a sense of the sort of main part of this wall, which is the set of images of the Peretz circle. And what we did here was we selected about 25 writers and others as representatives of this generation and this sort of transformative space. So in no particular order, we have the story writer Itzhameah Weissenberg, we have Joseph Opatoshu up here, we have Shin Ansky, author of the Dibuk. Ansky and Peretz really came out of the same mold. They were activists, they were ethnographers, they They both used folklore as the basis for new creative works. They were extremely engaged intellectuals and very close friends. That's my great-grandfather, Sholem Ash. This is Chava Shapiro. We will come back to her in a moment. Zuzman Segalowicz, a story writer, very popular writer in interwar Poland. Froim Kaganowski, whose quotes I read out, with his son, who he named, who else? Peretz. And then moving on, Jenta Seredatsky, Alexander, this color portrait here is the critic, the theater critic and memoirist, Alexander Mukdoini. So Alexander Mukdoini means basically Alexander the Great, Alexander of Macedonia. Of course, that wasn't his birth name, but like many aspiring Yiddish writers and intellectuals, he took a pseudonym. And in the case of Alexander Kappel, which was his original name, not known for his modesty, he chose Alexander the Great. We have the painter Minkowski. We'll come back to Regina Lilientalova, David Bergelsen, and so on and so on. Yankov Dinezon, who was Peretz's constant companion and confidant. So these are writers, painters, ethnographers, and so on. We also have this beautiful samovar donated thanks to Sherry and Bob, Sherry Krasner, Zelazny and Bob Krasner. Thank you if you happen to be watching. And we took our cue for Peretz's desk from this wonderful portrait. Swing it around a little, Lisa. Perfect, that's great. And so this picture, which is in the Yivo archives in New York, shows Peretz at his desk. If you come here, you'll see we recreated the exact pattern of the wallpaper that we picked out from the photograph. And we've matched the Shabbos candlesticks in the photo. Peretz has an inkwell. In fact, he has multiple inkwells, a desk piled high with papers, a painting by Minkowski of a fruit cellar in Warsaw on the wall, and gazing out with these sort of playful, fiery eyes of his that people commented on so much. All right, so now that's by way of sort of scene setting. I'll sit myself at Peretz's desk. First time I've ever done this. Feels a little strange, but why not? We will explore Peretz and his biography and this circle of his disciples and proteges in more detail with a PowerPoint that Elizabeth is very kindly going to put on the screen. And here we go. So we start with Peretz. I love this picture. Actually, you know, I saw this picture in the kitchen at Yivo as I was sort of wandering the corridor. And I love the fact that Yivo, their pin-up in the kitchen is this picture of Peretz. And it tells many things that people commented on about him. He was a keen dresser. He had a very strong dress sense. He liked to be elegant, had a repertoire of jackets and waistcoats and striped trousers and bow ties, and was very conscious of his appearance. And was very youthful, really until the last decade of his life in the aftermath of the 1905 failed uprising, when he became worn down progressively. But really up until that point, into his 50s, he had an extremely energetic, youthful presence. And so this is really how he would have appeared in the Salon of the 1890s and early 1900s. Just a little biography. So Peretz was born in Zamość in 1851 or 52 into a reasonably well-off family. He had a good education in Hebrew, Russian, German, French. He knew Polish. He had a traditional Jewish education, but had tutors in a lot of these extra subjects. Was a kind of tearaway kid. And came to Warsaw for a couple of years in the 1870s, and then returned to his hometown, Zamość near Lublin, and eventually qualified as a lawyer. And throughout the 1880s, he was primarily a practicing lawyer, but publishing Hebrew poems and sort of immersing himself progressively in the emerging literary culture of Yiddish and Hebrew, which is sort of embryonic at that point, especially Yiddish. And by the end of the 1880s, he gets to know Shalom Aleichem and collaborates on Shalom Aleichem, with Shalom Aleichem, sending material to a journal that Shalom Aleichem is publishing. But Peretz, really, unlike Shalom Aleichem and Mendele, who come out of a Russian sphere, Peretz is very much rooted in Poland and influenced by sort of emerging ideas of Polish nationalism and literature and culture and folklore as a sort of a wave to ride the nationalist movement with. And that's very important in his thinking. At the same time, Warsaw is dramatically growing as a Jewish city. It's really kind of parochial and provincial in the mid-19th century, but by 1900 and up until the First World War, it's growing exponentially, becoming the second largest Jewish city in the world, and increasingly the center of Yiddish culture and Yiddish publishing, and so on. All right, so Elizabeth, let's go to the next one. And this is, the next image is something that's in the exhibition, which is a book that just came in, as so many books do, by chance here. And I love this book. It's in incredibly good condition. It was published in Warsaw in 1909. And this is a time at which the publisher Lidsky, Yankov Lidsky, who comes back to Warsaw from Chicago, brings a lot of printing plates with him, transforms Yiddish publishing from 1900 when he starts his Progress publishing house. And so what you kind of have to understand is this whole literary culture is becoming professionalized, and Peretz is at the center of it. And, you know, thanks in large measure to his growing influence, people like Lidsky are attracted to set up in Warsaw as a publisher, a bookseller, a printer, an entrepreneur. And one of the things Lidsky does in 1909 is he publishes a multi-volume edition of Peretz's writings. This is volume 2, Die Zeit, a book of poems and stories. And he puts on the cover these paste-down pictures of Peretz, you know, a dramatic innovation in Yiddish publishing. Nobody had done that up until this point. Yiddish, you know, no Yiddish publishers really made money. It was a hand-to-mouth operation. Lidsky gives Peretz this extraordinary respect of a multi-volume edition of his writings. So, okay, next one is Peretz, as you know, attracts this sort of stellar cast of young writers, revolutionaries, activists, and I've tried to structure this a little bit in chronological order. It's not perfect, but this is David Pinsky. And Pinsky is extremely influential as a collaborator with Peretz in the 1890s. He's on his way to, I think it was Vienna, to study medicine, and he takes time out from his train journey to drop in at Peretz and present him some writings, and stays for several years, never goes back to his medical studies. And for a few years in the 1890s, he and Peretz are extremely active in something called the Jargonische Komiteten, the jargon committees, which were a very conscious way of bringing cheap Yiddish literature, pamphlet literature, to Jewish working class masses. And this is something that is preoccupying Peretz in the 1880s and 90s, this extremely progressive social conscience, as he never abandons Hebrew. He writes in Hebrew alongside Yiddish, but he's very conscious of the fact that Yiddish is going to be the emerging language in the diaspora, and the vehicle for the sort of Jewish cultural nationalism that he espouses and that he sort of codifies and makes speeches about, and is really the figurehead of from the 1890s onwards. So this is Pinsky, David Pinsky. And the next one, Elizabeth. Pinsky is a playwright, a short story writer, but wrote a tremendous number of plays, actually, very few of which are performed. And his plays were extremely popular among amateur Yiddish theater groups, dramatische Kreisen, so dramatic circles. And this is a little bit later. This is the 1920s. This is unrelated to Pinsky and Peretz directly, but it shows you what an amateur Yiddish theater group looked like. And it's just an extraordinary and wonderful image. It's one of 4 such images that were sent in out of the blue to us by Dina Moses. The family had found them in the process of clearing a house. She sent them to us asking for our help identifying anything about the pictures. They are quite wonderfully sharp images of a shtetl Yiddish theater group of the sort that was putting on Pinsky's plays in the 1900s and 1910s. And not just Pinsky, but Sholem Asch and Peretz Hirschbein and Leon Kobrin and so many others. But this was an extremely important part of sort of grassroots Yiddish culture, these literary and dramatic circles. And you can see in the window, the faces pressed to the window, sort of gazing out at the presumably unprecedented spectacle of a photographer who's come into the shtetl to take this photograph. So then next one is, it's a very specific publication, and this is part of a sort of programmatic piece of Peretz's activity in the 1890s. Everything that Peretz is doing and his circle are doing takes place under Russian censorship, and it's a sort of cat and mouse game. The censors, who were often Jewish, sort of assimilated Jews working for the Russian government, you know, they sort of, it was a bit of a game, and they cracked down at times, they eased up at times. But Peretz, especially in the 1890s, which is his sort of most socialist, most radical phase, he's most engaged and close to the Jewish working class. And he is being watched, and in fact is imprisoned for 2 or 3 months at one point at the end of the 1890s. So one of the things he does to evade censorship, and the Russians are constantly closing down Yiddish newspapers and journals and so on. Peretz puts out what he calls the Yontov Blättlech, holiday leaves or holiday pages, and they are ostensibly pamphlets that celebrate, in this case, I think it's Lag Boimer, there are Purim ones, Shavuos ones. So on the face of it and on the cover, they appear to be sort of religious holiday celebratory pamphlets. Actually, what they are extremely sharp satirical critiques of rabbis, the clerical class, Jewish tradition, Zionists, assimilated Polonized Jews, and so on. This one is Der Pfeil und Bogen, the arrow and the bow. Peretz signs himself Der Lumpenputzer, the ragamuffin, and then he adds as an satirical afterthought, a frum rabbonish Liedl, a pious little rabbinical poem. So he's very playful, you know, he's mocking the censor. And there were 17 of these pamphlets that really carry his social critiques between 1894 and 1896. Okay, next one, Elizabeth, please. And that is, yeah, as I said, the 1890s, the time of these Yontov Blättlech are really a time when Peretz is extremely avidly engaged with the emerging Jewish working class. This is a photograph of striking Jewish weavers in Łódź, in Lodz, in 1902. There's sort of growing unrest on the streets, which comes to a head in the uprising of 1905 to 1906. Most Polish cities experienced barricades, armed groups of Cossacks on horseback trying to suppress demonstrations. So it's an extremely turbulent time. So that's the 1890s. So then let's sort of change direction a little bit. And I want to talk about one of the challenges that we face in recreating this whole salon sort of experience. So moving on, Elizabeth. All right, so a rather sort of uncomfortable image. This is the writer Salome Pearl, a very interesting and recently discovered or rediscovered writer. And there's a wonderful set of translated stories of hers, translated by Ruth Murphy, called The Canvas, I think, and Other Stories. And Pearl is not on the circle wall in the portraits. Why? Because, as you see here, the only image that, as far as I could tell, reaching out, we could find is this tiny thumbnail on the left of the screen in a lexicon of Yiddish writers from the 1920s. So she has a considerable entry there. She's well known as a story writer. She is close to Peretz from the 1890s. She publishes initially in Polish. He would definitely have been able to read and known her work in Polish. And then he persuades her to write in Yiddish, as he did with so many writers. And she publishes in Yiddish under his auspices. And her last story, I think, comes out in 1910, which is The Canvas, which is the story of a woman whose main sphere of autonomy is embroidery. She doesn't withstand the arranged marriage that's made for her. She feels marginalized, beleaguered, alone. And the place where she comes into her own is embroidery, and hence the canvas. So we tried desperately. Lisa's wonderful photographer friend, Mike Brinley, tried his best to enhance this image from this tiny stamp-sized version in the lexicon, and this was the best we could come up with on the right, which obviously doesn't really work and doesn't do her justice. So we were very determined to insert women into the mostly male environment as it's presented in the scholarly literature of the Peretz Salon. And it was mostly a male environment, but there were a number, and actually quite a number, of very interesting women writers and scholars and activists and theater people and so on. And so the challenge really was where to find those images for some of them. And in this case, we really failed, but not through want of any trying. You know, it was just impossible to find a usable image of Salome Pearl, which, you know, tells you something about Yiddish literary culture and what's sort of come down to us and the ways in which it's come down to us. Okay, next picture is someone we were more successful with, which is the writer Chava Shapiro. And this wonderful image of her, probably aged around 16. She is a noted and influential Hebrew and Yiddish writer. She's born in 1878. A journalist, a literary critic, a memoirist, a fiction writer, a frequent guest at Peretz's Salon. She would have met Hebrew writers there as well as Yiddish writers. She wrote the first feminist manifesto in Hebrew in 1909. So a really fascinating individual. But a lot of these people first encountered Peretz and made their way to the Salon as teenagers. And it's a remarkable feature of this period of Yiddish culture and literature that, you know, at 16 and 17, you were already you considered yourself probably a fully fledged adult, and obviously many people were working from the ages of 12, 13, 14. And so many of them were publishing from these extremely young ages. Okay, and the next one, another very, very interesting personality. This is Regina Lilienthal, born Gittel, but known as Regina, with her husband, a picture from the 1890s. Lilienthal is a pioneer ethnographer, a really scientific researcher into ritual, folklore, descended from a line of famous rabbis, and also possibly the first, but certainly one of the earliest translators of Peretz into Polish, his stories into Polish. And she prefaces her set of translations with a very astute introductory piece about Peretz. And so this was also a bit of a challenge to find pictures of Lilienthal at this young age. But luckily, her great-granddaughter, Dorota Lilienthal, is an actress and a translator in Warsaw who worked closely with us and supplied this picture. And Dorota is working on a book about her great-grandmother's life and writings, which she hopes to publish, I think, by the end of this year, which will be her centenary of her death. So she died young in 1924. So in many of these cases, and that's true of the exhibit as a whole, actually, we were really reaching out over many months and years to descendants and families to find these unseen images, and especially to find images of writers in their teens and 20s, rather than the sort of better known images, which tend to be in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. All right, so that's sort of the challenge of inserting the women into the Peretz Salon, which we, I'm sort of comfortable that we accomplished, but it more, of course, could have been done, and it was not an easy thing to do in the way that we did. All right, so again, a sort of sideways move, now moving to the 1900s. So Elizabeth, thank you. So really, things sort of step up pace in the 1900s. Peretz is really now a full-fledged celebrity, in constant demand as a speaker, as a contributor to journals and so on. And it's at this point that really a bunch of his closest collaborators and comrades comes into the picture, and this is Hersch David Nomberg, who is a story writer, also a politician, a member of the Polish Parliament at some point. And the next one, Elizabeth, I think is my great-grandfather, Shalom Asch, 1903, in his early 20s, this sort of dreamy, romantic presentation leaning up against a tree, possibly in his hometown of Kutna in the middle of Poland. And Nomberg and Asch and Raisin form this kind of club of young, hungry, literally and metaphorically hungry writers who pitch up in Warsaw, becoming sort of immediately very close to Peretz, and he sort of senses that this is the core of his project to develop the new Yiddish literature. And so the next one, Elizabeth, I think is probably Avram Raisin, the third of them, right? So I just got to take some water here. Okay, so Avram Raisin. Raisin and Nomberg are slightly younger than Asch. This is a lovely image courtesy of Yivo with a dedication from Raisin to Dr. Ellisberg in New York. This is a slightly later picture, around 1908-9. But Raisin, Nomberg, and Asch all carry the sort of Peretz philosophy into the wider world, and especially Nomberg stays in Poland, but Raisin and Asch pretty quickly move to, well, Raisin first moves to New York, Asch comes to New York in 1914, and then stays a decade, but first travels to New York in America in 1909. And they all take this philosophy of being sort of engaged in the public sphere politically, in terms of their activism. And Raisin is Avram Raisin here, is extremely active as an editor and a sort of mediator of Yiddish literature in New York. And so on the next slide, this is one of his projects, which is another thing that it is published by Lidsky, the Progress publisher guy, who publishes that red book of Peretz and the multi-volume set of Peretz. So another of Lidsky's projects is this Europäische Literatur, European literature, which is a series of pocket-sized pamphlets. We have all of them on our shelves, and it covers maybe 6, 7, 8 inches of shelf space. So they publish them over months and then years and rebound them into sort of book form. But this is really a project to translate the likes of Maupassant, Mark Twain, Heine, a whole bunch of disparate figures from world literature from different times and places. And interestingly, and you see this a lot, who is the archetypal reader that graces the cover of this, it's a woman. And so women and especially young women and teenage girls are the predominant audience for the new emerging Yiddish literature. And that is, everybody knows that and recognizes that, and it's expressed iconographically in these kind of images, as you see here. All right, so moving on. So this is kind of this is a wonderful picture which gives a sense of the sort of informality of the Peretz circle. This is Peretz at the center by the tree. That's Sholomash, the slightly taller figure in the lighter suit on the left of the picture. And then on the other side is Peretz's son, Lucian. And you can see how youthful Peretz looks. I mean, he really doesn't look much older than his son in this picture. This must be around 1907, 1908. And lying on the ground is Nomberg. So you have Peretz with two of his closest colleagues at this point, Ash and Nomberg, and his son Lucian, who had a very troubled relationship to his Judaism, was very ambivalent about it, and generally led a rather troubled life. And the next one, and this is a detail from this iconic picture of Peretz, Ash standing up, and Zhitlovsky sitting next to Peretz at the Chernovitz conference. So the Chernovitz language conference in 1908 in what is now Chernauty, Ukraine, deliberately held across the border outside the Russian Empire to evade censorship, is a landmark in this sort of evolution of Yiddish, the status of Yiddish. And there's a lot of debate about, is Yiddish the or simply a national language of the Jewish people? But in a way, more importantly, there's a sort of a lot of debate and discussion about what does Yiddish need to mature as a literature and as a culture. And everybody agrees, led by Peretz, that what it needs above all are the treasures of not just world literature, but especially the Jewish heritage from the Bible onwards, translated into Yiddish. And that's already happening, but Chernovitz sort of gives that a philosophy and kickstarts efforts by people like Yehoash, who then translates the extraordinary work translating the Old Testament into Yiddish in this very beautiful poetic style. So this is an example of the Peretz circle as engaged public intellectuals in 1908. All right, moving on quickly. So then we have 1909 to 1910, the extraordinary story of Thea Arciszewska, who is pictured here, and an illustration that was commissioned for Packenträger, where we ran this crazy translation about Arciszewska and her then partner, a sculptor called Kratko, who sort of burst into the Peretz circle in 1909, fresh from 2 years in the Middle East, in Jerusalem and Egypt and so on. And we kind of promised you a goat in the publicity for this talk. And I guess we've delivered, in a sense. This is the goat. So why is there a picture of Arciszewska and a goat? So Arciszewska is this sort of fascinating teenage figure in the Peretz Salon at this point. She comes from a very Hasidic family. She runs away to marry or run off with her lover, Kratko, and they run off to the Middle East. And then they come back and they set themselves up in a garret in Warsaw. I wanted to read you the whole extract because it's just wildly surreal and wonderful. It's by Yudia Trunk, who was another member of the Peretz circle, who experienced this sort of moment when these two figures sort of bedecked in Orientalism and smelling of incest and covered in Middle Eastern jewels and so on. They emerge into the Peretz circle. And Kratko is a wonderful artist, and Peretz latches onto him as the sort of artistic face of the Yiddish Renaissance. And Kratko sort of decides he needs rabbits and hens and animals in his studio, was working models for his art, and at some point gets a goat. And Arciszewska doesn't know much about goats, but she knows she wants a gold goat. And so she decides one day to paint it entirely gold. goes to bed, wakes up the next morning, and the goat is dead because she's blocked off all its pores. And so this memoir by Trunk is just this sort of dazzling Baroque description of this whole episode, which I don't have time to read to you, but if you've got Packenträger or look it up, I think it's on the website, you'll find it. All right, so moving on. So this is the same figure. She's born Ter or Tocha Lipska, that's the Hasidic family name, but Peretz christens her or dubs her Miriam Israels, and she becomes a sort of muse to Peretz, and also to the painter Minkowski, whose painting this is, sadly, whereabouts unknown, probably destroyed, but this is Artashevska as the model for Minkowski. And if you're in New York, on April the 18th, Sonia Golans, the scholar, has translated Artashevska's play that she writes through the 1920s and 30s and 40s about children in the wake of the post-World War I pogroms. And it's a play called Miriamel, Little Miriam, and it's going to have its world premiere stage reading in New York on April the 18th. And in London on March the 6th. So if you're in either of those places, you can catch Thea Artashevska's work. All right, next up is Kratka, her partner. So this is, Kratka is by the piano on the right of this image in a Warsaw art studio class. And then the next one, Elizabeth, is, this is what Peretz did. So Kratka is 20 or so at this point, really a complete unknown, but he has this extraordinary sort of new Jewish art, which is a mix of Art Nouveau, Jewish folklore, motifs from the Middle East, and his travels. And Peretz decides that it's only Kratka who will illustrate the frontispieces to his plays in this one-volume set of drama plays, which comes out in 1909-10. Each of the 6 plays has a Kratka illustration on its front. And so let's look at the next 2 pictures. Elizabeth, just move it forward, and then we get 2 more. The Golden Kate, and I'll just flip back one. And I think that the next one is this play with the title in Polish after Kate, Chained in the Synagogue Vestibule. These sort of mystical, symbolist, surrealist, philosophical plays that Peretz was writing that didn't really have great success on the stage in his lifetime or really even since, but they come out in this magical edition, and it's really the foundation of a whole movement in modern Jewish art and Yiddish modernist avant-garde art, and this whole way in which artists and writers collaborate in these circles in Lodz and Warsaw and Vilna and Kiev and Paris, and it goes on and on and on. And it all starts here with the meeting between Kratka and Peretz and these remarkable pictures. So that's a sense of the circle. So then let's move on. Peretz dies in 1915. He's in his 60s at this point, mid-60s at this point. And this is a cartoon from the New York satirical journal Der Große Kundus, the Big Stick, from 1915, really expressing this void, this abyss in the Yiddish world that his passing leaves. And you have figures in the background representing art and poetry, consoling each other. And in the front, this is Yiddish literature crying over an empty chair labeled Peretz. And she says, "I don't even have anyone to take his place." So there was this enormous sense of a void in the Yiddish literary world. 100,000 people turn out to Peretz's funeral in 1915. The route is dictated entirely by the Russian censors. They don't allow it to go through the center of Warsaw, but nonetheless, people defy the sort of the politically charged atmosphere, and they pour out onto the streets for his funeral. And then the next image, 10 years later, in 1925, the Ohel Peretz, the mausoleum to Peretz, but also two other writers, Ansky and Dinezon, is erected, and this is to this day, this is how it looks in the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw. My thanks to Scott Davis, who has put this image on his website, which celebrates the work of Yaakov Dinezon, Peretz's closest sort of confidant and collaborator. So you can look up jacobdinezon.com, which is Scott's wonderful website, really trying to reintroduce Dinezon's work to us through translation and so on. And the mausoleum was restored a few years ago by the Polish government. It's a wonderful structure. It's the sculptor Avram Oszczego dies in the Holocaust. He's murdered in, I think it's Treblinka, and really his chief surviving works are his tombstones in the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery. Okay, and the next one, I think, is the detail of the wonderful stone at the back. So you see there Peretz on the top, Dinezon and Ansky. Three very close friends, united in death in this wonderful mausoleum. Okay, quickly, we're just wrapping up. So this is the final section in the room, is entitled Legacy. And this is a poster. The original is at YIVO, so thanks again to YIVO for this. This is a memorial event in Poland in 1929, the 14th Yahrzeit of Peretz's death. It's a provincial event, but it's a typical sort of gathering of music, a lecture, recitations by an actor. So every year on Peretz's anniversary, there were events like this throughout Poland, indeed throughout the world, of different sorts. And then the next shows the naming of Peretz Square in New York. This happened in 1952, thanks to the Congress for Jewish Culture. It's on the spot where Houston, if I'm pronouncing that right, not my strong suit, Houston Street, First Avenue and First Street meet. It's basically a little park, but you can see the crowd that turned out even in 1952. And then finally, last image is Peretz's legacy is still being interpreted and reworked and, you know, re-engaged with. And this is Frank London, the trumpeter and klezmer and musicologist and wonderful Yiddishist figure here at Yidstock, our Festival of New Yiddish Music in 2017, in this modern multimedia recreation of Peretz's 1907 play, The Night in the Old Market, Nacht auf den Alten Markt. And so that's really where we're going to end. And I'm just, so if we come out of the slides, what I'm going to do is just, and you can hopefully fire some questions our way, but I'll just, and this will be on our website afterwards, so you can watch it. I'll very quickly show you some further resources. This is the play Miriamul that we talked about, that's having its premieres in March and April. This is a book center, just republished, set Ruth Weiss's volume of Peretz compilation, the Peretz Reader. This is a favorite of mine, Marv Zuckerman's older compilation of Peretz's work, one of 3 volumes of classic Yiddish writers, I.L. Peretz, Selected Works. This is a book that's just come out by Adi Mahalel, the scholar, The Radical Isaac, Peretz and the Rise of Jewish Socialism. This is the volume I mentioned, translations by Ruth Murphy of Salome Pearl. This is where you can find a wonderful memoir by Peretz's niece, Rosa Lax Peretz. This is a volume called Classic Yiddish Stories, edited by Ken Frieden, and it's a really classy volume. It has work by Shalom Aleichem, Mendeler, and Peretz, but also a memoir, a really wonderful memoir in each case about them. And finally, if you want to read all about the transformation of Yiddish reading in the Russian Empire, also just published Yiddish Transformed, Reading Habits in the Russian Empire by Nathan or Natty Cohen, a real extraordinary compendium of detail about this whole emerging world of publishers, booksellers, authors, and the reading public. So you can revisit the link on our website and just look at any of these if you wanted to sort of take it further and delve into some of these resources. So Lisa is sat at the back of the salon. Do we have any questions?
We do.
Oh, we do.
We'll start off, is much written by other Yiddish writers about Peretz?
Is much written by other Yiddish writers about Peretz? A huge amount. Peretz is probably the single most memoirized and remembered Yiddish writer. Most of it is available in Yiddish. There are bits of it, as I mentioned, this book edited by Ken Frieden has this wonderful 30 pages or so by Rosa Peretz-Lax. The volume by Marv Zuckerman has other memoirs, actually by Sholem Asch, by Raisin and Nomberg, and a few others. And if you come here to the Peretz Salon, Carrot O'Brien has voiced up and worked with us to put together a wonderful audio compilation of some of these memoirs. So there are reams and reams of them, yes.
Curious how you curated the Peretz Circle.
How did we curate the Peretz Circle? Well, the aim was obviously to show not every figure, because that literally would be hundreds of names. So we wrote to many of the Peretz scholars and the sort of Yiddish scholars, Sam Kassau, Justin Kami, all sorts of people asking for Renata Piatkowska in Warsaw at the Poland Museum, asking for their, sort of recommendations in terms of names that we could add to our list, because the obvious names are easy to find, but there are so many less obvious names. And someone like Sam Kassau, who's deeply read in this Yiddish memoiristic literature, could immediately send 10 or 15 names that weren't on our first list. So we compiled a list that ran to about 100 names. And from there, it was really a question of finding a good set of images, as I spoke about a little earlier, and they should be representative in terms of the types of people. And they also match with a set of books that if you come here, you'll see we have a long case of books by 10 or 12 of these writers from our collection here. We also have quotes by members of the circle. So there's a quote by Sholem Asch about singing folk songs in the twilight, which was another feature of the Peretz Salon. Peretz was deeply in love with Hasidic tradition and Hasidic folk songs, and like nothing better than to sit around singing Hasidic songs and introduce his younger colleagues to this sort of wealth of music and folklore. So, and how did we create the images? Well, Lisa and I spent many pleasant weeks antique shopping in the local antique markets. She's smiling at me, finding suitable frames to put these images in, and that's how we created this, or recreated this gallery that no doubt never existed in Peretz's study in exactly this way. But how are you going to suggest this gathering sense and so on?
I saw the play Indecent, and in a scene, it takes place in Peretz's Salon. What are your thoughts about that and the scene?
Oh, that's a great question. So the play Indecent by Paula Vogel, that takes its cue from Sholem Asch's play God of Vengeance, and recreates this whole world, has a scene set in the Peretz Salon at which Asch gives his first reading of God of Vengeance to Peretz and the assembled gathering. And Asch himself wrote Peretz's reaction, and this is the line in the play. His reaction was, "Burn it, Asch, burn it," because this play is set in a brothel. Peretz, if indeed he said that, would have seen it as sort of washing communal dirty linen in public. So that, there are definitely parts that are historically extremely accurate to that presentation. My slight sort of, I have a slightly different picture of the Peretz Circle, and I think, I hope I conveyed it in some of these images. In Indecent, It's a rather sort of austere, buttoned-up gathering, a bit like a sort of what I imagine if Yiddish had a French-style Academy of Letters, you know, they would have all been sitting around very sort of properly. And Peretz was not that. He was a quicksilver, sharp-tongued, humorous, playful, very, very sort of funny character. And I think it was probably a very light-hearted sort of place, the Peretz Salon. I mean, serious, of course, as well, but a lot of laughter and a lot of fun. And for me, it's slightly too buttoned up and a little too formal and indecent. But, you know, that's just my sense of it. Who knows?
What did you discover as you endeavored to recreate the salon and also the circle?
What did we discover? Well, one of the things that was really a feature as we worked throughout the exhibition was what an interesting moment this is to create an exhibition like this and to recreate a salon in this way, because it feels like a wonderful sort of golden age for scholarship and translation and new creativity in theater and music and all sorts of areas. And the exhibition draws on everything that's out there and in the generosity of many of these colleagues of ours, scholars and translators and so on, in sharing their work. But at the same time, it's actually very hard. You know, for example, a really basic thing, who was in the Peretz circle at what time? There's no Wikipedia page, there's no list I could find online that actually tells you exactly who these people are. And so you could spend months and indeed years adding names to this list by reading any amount of Yiddish memoirs and Yiddish scholarly works, but it really is still embedded in the Yiddish literature and in the minds of, you know, the Sam Kassaus and Justin Cammys of this world. And there's a lot of information that really is not that easy to find. So, I mean, it was news to me that Chava Shapiro and Lilian Talova and some of these people were in the Peretz Salon. So it was challenging. And I mean, there's a wealth of material on the one hand, photographs and books, obviously, but you know, the Salon really needed to do two things. Tell you something about Peretz the man and tell you something about his influence and the transformative nature of this particular space, and obviously, you know, in a sense, recreate with the candlesticks and the inkwell, all of which are period pieces, by the way. So it is in keeping. But I think the key thing I took away from it is actually how much we still don't know, and a sort of kind of jealousy that if I could revisit this in 25 years' time, how much more we would undoubtedly know.
What do you know about young writer Yonah Rosenfeld going to visit Peretz during one of Peretz's touring trips around 1909?
What do I know about Yonah Rosenfeld visiting Peretz around 1909? Nothing, basically. Well, no, I mean, but it's interesting, you know, so Rosenfeld is, yeah, as I say, one of hundreds of names. Everyone encounters Peretz at a particular moment in time. Rosenfeld, another writer who's being translated and rediscovered only now, widely published and widely known in his time. But beyond that, no, I don't know the specifics of that encounter at all.
How did this mausoleum of the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery survive the Holocaust?
Yeah, well, remarkably, the Jewish cemetery in Okopowa Street, which is on the edge of the Jewish area that was completely destroyed, the ghetto area that was entirely rebuilt after the war. So, you know, picture it, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943, you know, is a huge snub to the Germans, and the only way they suppress it is by bombing the place to smithereens and destroying, you know, burning people alive, destroying the buildings with the partisan fighters in them, and it takes them weeks to try and fight it out on the streets, and they're not succeeding. So they basically blow up the whole area, and it's an enormous area. And so if you go there now, what you see are the post-war 5- and 6-story residential blocks that were built around where the Poland Museum occupies this sort of central site. And you walk for miles, or what feels like miles, certainly a long time, through these streets of these identikit blocks. And then you get to the edge of that area and you cross the main road. I've been there many times. And you find a completely preserved, untouched cemetery, which is either the largest Jewish cemetery in Europe or certainly one of the largest. I think it's something like 200,000 graves in it. And many of them are remarkable monuments. And it was just not a priority for the Germans to either use the stones as they did elsewhere to build or repave roads or to destroy it. So it was just left, and it's a miracle, and go and see it. It's an extraordinary place. There's really nowhere. I mean, there are other major Jewish cemeteries in Lodz and elsewhere, but there's nothing like this. You know, this is really where all the great names like Kaminska and Nomberg and Peretz and the others are buried, and you can spend days touring around. It's extraordinary.
Question about the street scene. Will that be available on the Yiddish Book Center's website?
The street scene?
That was shown in the title card, which is on the wall,
Yeah. So the thing that we put up as that transitional image is actually an image that during the daytime when you come here, we've reproduced across a sort of 12-foot window, which is the fourth, it's where Lisa's standing now, it's the fourth wall of this space. And so it gives the effect of gazing out from this room onto a Warsaw street, which is actually in the heart of the former Jewish ghetto, so-called. So yes, you will see that. And there are any number of great postcards. These are all commercial postcard images of Warsaw in the 1900s and 1910s, full of trams passing through, full of Russian shop signs on the shops and so on.
I'm going to make this the last question, but can you speak a little bit about how the Peretz Salon fits into the larger narrative that you're telling in this exhibition?
Yeah, it's how does the Peretz Salon fit into the larger narrative? You know, it's in a way it's an outlier. It's a unique, sort of immersive, recreated, recurated space, but it speaks directly to the kind of core pillars of this exhibition, which are the theater, the literature, and the press, all of which, you know, as I hope was explained, Peretz was at the center of in his lifetime, and especially in this 25-year period, 1890 to 1915. And so many of these figures that we've spoken about, you know, Raisin, Ash, Nomberg, Hirschbein, and the others are people you meet throughout the rest of the exhibition in all these different sections. So Peretz Hirschbein, there's a photograph of him with his father as one of the images in the Peretz circle, but we have another display, which is the Hirschbein trunk that was donated by the family, that is the exact leather steamer trunk that Peretz Hirschbein and his wife Esther Shumiacher, a poet, took with them on their round-the-world travels throughout the 1920s, and that's its own exhibit about globe-trotting and travel. And Hirschbein is also in the theater section. He's also in the press section, and many of these figures, you know, that's also the case. That's true of them. So it's its own thing, but it's definitely joins the dots to many other parts of the exhibition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us, for joining us, for sending your questions, and for supporting the work of the Book Center. It's been a real pleasure to give you some sense of the Peretz Salon, and hopefully for some of you at least, you'll be able to come here. This exhibition will be up for years. Come whenever you can. We'll welcome you, and you will get to experience it and all the things that there wasn't time to tell you about it in person. So thanks very much.
Thank you, David. And thank you to our producer this evening, Elizabeth Carteropoli, for all that she does behind the scenes, as David acknowledged, and this evening she went a little bit further by creating a really wonderful way for us to have a visual dolly to go around. I hope that you will join us Thursday, February 22nd at 7 p.m. for a revolution in type, gender, and the making of the American Yiddish press with Ayelet Brin. Check out our calendar of events to see what's coming up, both in-person events and virtual events. We've got a lot on the calendar in the coming months, including Yidstock in July. And please consider a visit to the Yiddish Book Center to see our newly opened core exhibition, Yiddish: A Global Culture. We're open Sundays through Fridays, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Learn more at yiddishbookcenter.org/visit. I want to take a moment to thank all of our members whose donations support our work and make all of this ongoing work possible. Learn more about how you can join and support our work at yiddishbookcenter.org. Thanks again for joining us this evening. We hope to see you back here on Thursday, the 22nd of February. Good night.